Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to the webinar. Um, we are going to launch a short poll just whilst we're waiting for everyone to join the call. Um, so you should see some questions pop up on your screen now. Um, and if you wish to, it would be really great to get some feedback from you on coral restoration regulatory frameworks just whilst we're waiting for everyone to join the call. So we'll just keep that open for a couple of minutes, give everyone a chance to join the call, and then we'll get started with the webinar. Uh, can everyone hear me? I've got a message there from John saying he can't hear me, but everyone else can. Oh, okay, brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Yes, everyone will be muted automatically, so don't worry. Okay, so it looks like we've probably got most people here, I think, ready for the webinar. So yeah, do take the opportunity to fill in that poll. It'll be really great to get some insights and information from everyone who's attending the webinar. But let's get started um, on the webinar today. So welcome, thank you for joining us today, especially so close to the festive season. So I'll introduce myself. I'm on the slide there, but my name is Roanna Walton from UNEP-WCMC, and myself and my collaborators and colleagues are here today to talk to you about strengthening coral restoration regulatory frameworks. So there's a quick overview of the agenda. So a little bit of a welcome. I think as my colleagues speak, they'll also introduce themselves. We're going to talk about this regulatory guidance that we've produced, that we've been working on this year, and we're really excited to share that with you. We've also got some interesting perspectives that we want to share from government and practitioners who are working around these regulatory frameworks. Think a little bit about what's next. What do we hope for? What are we planning for? And then we've also got time for a Q&A session at the end. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. So this webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded to our UNEP-WCMC YouTube channel so we can share it with as many people as possible, especially those that maybe weren't able to come today. Your microphones have been automatically muted and your camera will be off throughout the webinar. That's just to give the focus on the speakers throughout the webinar. But if you would like to comment or ask a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You should be able to see that at the bottom as one of your options. And then we're going to have that Q&A session at the end where we can do live questions or take from the questions that people have asked throughout the webinar. If there's any technical issues, for some reason you can't see the slides, you can't hear the speakers, please send a direct message to Laura Mack. So that's in the chat there for the webinar. That's UNEP-WCMC events, and she can try and support you throughout the webinar. If you would like some translation, then live captions are available in English with translation to your preferred language. So that's just what's available automatically on Zoom, but please use that if you would like to. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Margot Monfred, and she's going to talk to us a bit about ICRI. So Margot.
Thank you so much, Roanna, and pleasure to be with you all today. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about ICRI and our ad hoc committees. So the International Coral Reef Initiative is a global partnership between nations and organisations which aims to drive urgent and collaborative global action for the conservation, protection and restoration of coral reefs, ensuring their resilience and sustainable management through inclusive policies and action-oriented solutions for people and economies. ICRI was founded back in 1994 by 8 nations and now counts 102 members, including 45 countries, accounting for over 75% of the world's coral reefs. ICRI is currently chaired by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and represented by Shams, and we primarily operate at the science to policy interface, translating knowledge into action and supported by an operational network known as the Global Coral Reef Network, Monitoring Network, sorry. So on the screen, you can see a little bit more about our ad hoc committees. And essentially, this is to support some of the work of ICRI, and we can establish these ad hoc committees, which are temporary working groups created to address specific topics or emerging issues aligned with ICRI's objectives. They provide a platform for coordination, expert input, and an official mechanism to advance priority coral reef issues. So in 2025, ICRI convened 3 ad hoc committees. The first was developing a motion for the IUCN World Conservation Congress, which took place in October. This work is now concluded following the adoption of Motion 37, the 4th Global Coral Bleaching Event. The second committee focuses on youth engagement, so strengthening ICRI's commitment to inclusive governance. And this work will culminate in the launch of a for coral use strategy in 2026. And then the third committee is the Restoration Ad Hoc Committee, which was originally established at ICRI's 33rd General Meeting in December 2018 in response to increasing disturbances affecting coral reefs worldwide. Given its continued relevance, the committee has been extended several times under updated terms of reference, and since 2023, it's been co-chaired by the Coral Restoration Consortium and UNEP-WCMC. Throughout this year, much of the committee's work has focused on the topic of today's webinar, which is the development of coral reef restoration regulatory guidelines. This is particularly timely as scientific information in reef restoration is advancing rapidly, while regulatory frameworks often remain outdated, inconsistent, or fragmented. So strengthened and coherent regulation is essential to ensure that restoration efforts are effective, scalable, and responsibly implemented. So that's just a short introduction to ICRI and the ad hoc committee's work. But if you do have any further questions on ICRI, I'd be happy to answer them for you. And with that, I'll pass back to Rowana, who's going to provide further background on the project.
I think some people are not able to see the presentation. So I don't know, Laura, if you can just check that for us whilst I'm talking. I'll carry on, but do know that we are going to share these slides afterwards as well, so we can share that with it. Okay, some people can see it. Good. Well, I'll carry on. So yes, as Margot said, why did we want to do this work? Why are we interested in this report? And why did we come together to collaborate on this kind of project? So I'm sure most of the people on this call know that our coral reefs are very valuable. They have a significant cultural and economic value to countries around the world from the ecosystem services and benefits that they provide. Unfortunately, however, these coral reefs are increasingly at risk. And we saw from the Global Tipping Points report this year that they are reaching a critical tipping point. And so now more than ever, we need to facilitate as many interventions as we can to protect, conserve, and restore these reefs. So restoration is becoming increasingly necessary. It can't replace protected areas or protection or effective management. We shouldn't be doing restoration in the absence of removing pressures or human-based drivers of degradation. Restoration can be seen as a really useful tool in a conservation toolbox that we can do to make sure these coral reefs can survive into the future. But restoration is gaining momentum, and restoration efforts are scaling up much faster than perhaps our legislation and our regulatory frameworks can adapt. Legislation and regulation can take a long time to enact and has to go through quite a detailed process. And this often is not aligned with the pace that scientific research and novel technologies are progressing in coral reef restoration. So this often means that there are many existing regulations that support or are around coral restoration that are perhaps outdated. Perhaps they were came into legislation 20, 30 years ago, much before the novel interventions that we're using in coral restoration today. And that often means that they're not fit for these restoration approaches that we're trying to use and that we're increasingly having to use as we adapt to the changing climate for coral reefs. So in order to make sure we can upscale restoration, make sure that we can continue using restoration as one of these tools, we need to ensure that we've got clear and coherent regulation and regulatory frameworks around coral restoration. This will hopefully ensure that our restoration interventions that we do are effective, that they are responsible, they are science-based, and making sure that we're always using the latest science and latest evidence to direct and guide these coral restoration interventions, and that they're scalable. So increasingly, we're seeing that we need to do coral restoration at larger and larger scales. And having a regulatory framework that supports this will allow us to do increasingly large-scale restoration. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jen, who's going to introduce the guidance that we have produced.
Lovely, thank you, Rowana. Hi everyone, I'm Jen Brand at UNEP-WCMC, and yeah, we're going to use this time to showcase our guidance document that we have produced and will be launching very soon. So, kind of as already alluded to, this guidance is all about strengthening coral reef restoration regulatory frameworks. So this guidance kind of serves two processes or two key aspects. So firstly, we wanted to explain the context surrounding regulatory frameworks to a wide audience. So this is really detailed through the explanations, particularly in chapter 3, where you can really get to grips with how regulatory frameworks act and what may influence them. So that's kind of, I guess, the conceptual guidance that is within this document. In addition to that, there is also a step-by-step process for readers to review and to strengthen their existing frameworks. So we'll be talking a lot today about this step-by-step process, so you can really get a feel for it. And as you know, already mentioned, this guidance we hope will support effective, responsible, and scalable restoration. So our colleague Margot will talk you through in a moment the 6 key principles and our user-friendly checklist that we have developed as part of this work. So a note on the audience of this document. Primarily, we have designed it for government agencies that are responsible for regulating coral reef restoration. However, as I've mentioned regarding the overall context, this guidance can be useful for a much wider audience, including practitioners, NGOs, academia, and the private sector, and anyone else that is keen to further their understanding and or engage with the regulatory processes surrounding coral reef restoration. So I will go to the next slide. Or someone can go to the next slide. Thank you. Perfect. So this is our 3-step approach that we have designed as part of this work. The 3 steps are to collate, to review, and to adapt. So for each step, we've got a detailed guidance on how you can go through these. And there is tools available in each to help the readers through this step. So the first step is to collate, and I'll go to the next slide. Great. So in this step, there is a conceptual framework that we've called a pyramid. that can be used to get an overview of the existing regulatory landscape in your country. So this is the conceptual framework, the pyramid that we have created. So through this step, the goal is to systematically identify all relevant laws, policies, commitments, action plans, regulations, anything and everything really that can be related to coral reef restoration. So we developed this pyramid to support that process so that the readers can clearly see the various levels of governance that can influence these regulatory environments. So at the bottom of the pyramid here, we've got multilateral environmental agreements and supporting strategies. So that's things like the CBD or CITES and strategies such as the Global Biodiversity Framework. And then this filters up through the pyramid all the way to on-the-ground implementation. So when we are looking to strengthen the regulatory framework surrounding coral reef restoration, it's really important to consider all of these levels of governance so that we can get a really holistic picture of everything that is part of this quite complex regulatory system. As well as the levels of governance, it's also really important to consider the breadth of governance that can be relevant. So, of course, things like marine protected area legislations, maybe coastal developments if you are deploying any nursery structures. These are all, I guess, the more at the forefront of people's minds when we think about regulations that influence coral reef restoration. But it is important to think more broadly for things like maybe fisheries or even pollution. So when we do this collating process, it's really important to get a diverse group around the table and make sure that there are experts around that can cover all of these various aspects, both in terms of the levels of governance and the breadth. So that's step one. Sounds so easy. And then at this point, I would just also like to showcase some of our case studies that we've developed as part of this work. So this is to help readers understand what we're talking about and really give some grounded examples of these various regulations and the regulatory environment. So we've got 8 case studies across the GCRMN regions. And you can see on this box here an example where we have Hawaii, and this is a snippet, I should say, a representation of their surrounding regulatory frameworks. So it doesn't cover everything. We couldn't get that onto one page. But this is a good representation of how this collation process can look. And with that, I will hand over to our video from our contact that helped us develop the case study for Hawaii, which is Honor Weber from the Division of Aquatic Resources. So I'll play the video now.
Aloha, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Honor Weber, and I'm an aquatic biologist with the State of Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources, Division of Aquatic Resources, and I will speak today about permitting for coral reef restoration in Hawaii. Depending on the methodologies, location, or scope of a project, various federal, state, or local permits may be needed to conduct reef restoration activities. On the federal level, all projects must consult with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and on the state level, all projects have to consult with the state's Office of Conservation and Coastal Lands. All projects need a special activity permit from the Division of Aquatic Resources. These are the permits that I work on and where most of my presentation will be focused. In 2015, Hawaiian reefs were devastated by a bleaching event. Warm summer waters caused the most severe thermal stress event in the main Hawaiian Islands, which lasted for 18 consecutive weeks. Most of West Hawaii Island was really impacted, and although there was variability between locations and species, surveys reported up to 92% of coral colonies had experienced some degree of coral bleaching. In the wake of that bleaching event, Hawaii saw interest and investment in coral restoration initiatives. Community, academic, nonprofit, and governmental organizations began navigating the regulatory systems to obtain permits to develop, test, and implement restoration methodologies in Hawaii. The main permit that organizations need for coral restoration work is the Division of Aquatic Resources Special Activity Permit, or an SAP. Because stony corals and live rock are fully protected under Hawaii administrative rules and coral reefs are managed as a public trust resource, the state serves as their trustee. So any restoration project requires an SAP that will authorize collection activities, approve methodologies, and enforce reporting. Hawaiian reefs are really unique when compared to other coral reef jurisdictions. Slow-growing massive corals dominate our reefs, and we lack the fast-growing branching species that have established restoration methodologies in other parts of the world. We also have really large swell events that make Hawaii famous for surfing, but really challenging for reef restoration. As reef restoration interest grew, our permitting team was overwhelmed by applications from groups trialing and scaling methodologies. The solution was to create a permitting framework specific to coral restoration with the goal of improving transparency and efficiency. A pathway that is rigorous enough to ensure proper management of state resources, but accessible and flexible as to not limit innovation or greater involvement, especially with the community. With this framework, the DAR SAP team should receive standardized, complete, and easy to evaluate applications. The tool began development in 2019, and we implemented it in May of this year. You can scan the QR code, which will take you to the tool, which is essentially a true or false fillable PDF that organizations or people interested in coral reef restoration can fill out and attach to their regular special activity permit application. True statements require less rigorous review, for they demonstrate alignment with state management and conservation policies, avoid sensitive habitats, and agree to reporting requirements. Blank statements indicate things within a project that need further review or justification. The main goal of this was to improve communication, primarily reducing back and forth communication between our permit staff, reviewing biologists, and applicants. This process also led to the development of the Hawaii Coral Restoration Scientific Advisory Board, which is a group of researchers, federal and state resource managers, and subject matter experts with whom our permitting team can consult. As I said, we implemented this tool in May, and I think it's gone fairly well. Our team definitely receives more information, and we now better understand the full scope of projects, and communication has been more streamlined. However, large projects with complex or novel methodologies are still a challenge and result in permit delays. Although permitting system for Hawaii is not perfect, we continue to work to improve it, and we see these challenges as an opportunity to grow and build relationships with our permittees and partners. Mahalo for your time. Please do not hesitate to reach out. I would love to connect and discuss permitting solutions, challenges, navigating the regulatory process, or just reef restoration in general. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Anna, for that fabulous presentation. And as she did say, her contact details are in there, and we will be circulating this presentation. So if anybody would like to reach out to her to hear more about what's going on in Hawaii, then please feel free to do so. So let me just go to the next slide. Great. So that is an overview of the collation process, and I will now hand over to our colleague Margot to talk about the review process. Thank you, Margot.
Super, thank you, Jen. Hi everyone, I'm Margot, the other Margot on this project, and I'm very proud to have worked with this wonderful team on this project. I think I have access to the slide. I'm gonna see if it works. Yeah, I think it worked. Super. So as Jen was saying, I'm gonna go over the checklist and those 6 key principles that we developed in this document. And I just want to preface this with saying that we really did not invent anything here in this checklist. Instead, our goal was really to align with existing best practices in ecosystem restoration broadly, and of course in coral reef restoration specifically. And we're also very mindful of how heavy regulation work can get. And so we wanted to distill this list to the very minimum principles we could, have put together to support coral reef restoration. So that first principle is the need to integrate with broader management strategies. And what this really means is that restoration should really not be thought as a standalone strategy, but instead more of a last resort strategy once other conservation measures are in place. So here you have some questions, guiding questions that help you through the checklist. For this principle, they include checking whether the threats to the proposed restoration area have been assessed, and also whether there are management strategies already in place to reduce impacts on coral reef systems, and that include strategies both inland and in water. And then there's also a checklist item there to check if coral restoration regulation can align with or build upon existing regulations. So for example, existing regulations on marine protected areas. We also provide some practical examples in the document, and a practical example for this first checklist items comes from India, where there is already a Coastal Zone Regulation Act in place. And that act prohibits activities that harm coral reefs and associated biodiversity in and around corals. And those activities include mining, sewage discharge, dredging, ship washings, and destructive fishing. The second principles is the need to consider coral reef ecosystem health and function. And here, the essence of this principle is to avoid promoting projects that are just focused on a number of corals planted, but instead have goals that make sense ecologically towards recovery. Guiding questions here include whether there is a focus on supporting natural recovery processes and resilience, and also whether there's considerations of integrating connection with other ecosystems such as seagrasses and mangroves. For a practical example here, we have the Coral Reef Conservation Program strategic plan in the USA, specifically regarding the restoration of the endangered pillar corals. And that strategic plan actually calls for restoring what they call viable coral populations with strategies to improve things like coral recruitment, habitat quality, enhance population resilience, and improve coral health and survival. There's also the third key principle here on the screen, stakeholder engagement, which is very important. So here ensuring that local stakeholders are identified and engaged early, but also throughout the restoration efforts. Guiding questions include whether local stakeholders have been identified and engaged, how traditional ecological knowledge is integrated. Note that it's a how and not an if here, and then whether there are a diversity of experts and expertise involved in the project. In Australia, the Great Barrier Reef Marine Authority has 2 important practical examples. They have an Indigenous Reef Advisory that provides consultation and insights for legislation, strategic action plans, and then actions taken within the Great Barrier Reef. And they also have a traditional use of marine resources agreement. And this one ensures that Torres Strait Islanders and Aboriginal stewardship and knowledge is integrated with Park Authority through things like junior ranger programs, funding, mapping territory, as well as research collaborations. The fourth principle is climate change and resilience. So we wanted to ensure that restoration plans for climate change, which is not going to go away, and have regulation that support and enable climate smart strategies. So here those guiding questions include whether thermal and disease tolerance of sites and species have been considered, whether there's a consideration of diversity and functional redundancy. So essentially that the risks are being spread with using a diversity of methods, sites, and corals, for example, and that emergency response plans are in place so that projects are equipped with the ability to cope when stresses occur. A practical example here is the NOAA Action Plan on Coral Interventions in the USA. That includes research and implementation of algal symbiont manipulation with NOAA partners. And it also outlines recommendation to test short distance managed relocations across thermal gradients and away from disease incidents. The fifth and sixth checklist items here, the fifth one is long-term adaptive management, essentially checking that projects are properly planned for the long term with monitorings and systems in place to adapt through time. So here, making sure that all phases of restorations are considered from the planning to the implementation, monitoring and evaluation, as well as having a clear exit and maintenance strategies, and also whether there's monitoring protocol in place to support adaptive management. There's a great example in Costa Rica where there's a dedicated agency called CNAC that's responsible for procedures and standards for design, installation, monitoring, and management of restoration projects. They have a dedicated website that outlines extensive guidelines for research and restoration permits, following CITES regulations. And those regulations, the CINAC regulations, are developed through a participative process, including technical workshops to best provide sustainable long-term goals. And finally, the last principle is the need for financial and organizational sustainability, something that's not always thought about, but basically making sure that there are processes in place to support the projects in the long term. So that includes whether there is sustainable funding strategy in place and also looking into the project governance structure to ensure it's adequate for long-term endeavors. For a practical example, we can look again at Costa Rica, where the wildlife conservation law actually provides a wildlife fund for financial resources to projects. And that funding for the wildlife funds comes from a variety of pots, including proceeds from wildlife revenue stamps, proceeds from permits and other regulatory fees, legacies and donations from public and private organizations, proceeds from fines, national budget, and also reallocations of operating surpluses. So this is a quick overview of those 6 key principles items. Happy to answer questions a little later on. And I think I'll pass it on to Tally for some practitioners' perspective.
Yes. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Margot. And thanks to this all-lady panel. It's been super fun working with everyone, and I hope that this guidance is really useful. So my name is Tali Vardy. I'm the Executive Director of the Coral Restoration Consortium. We are the global community of practice for reef restoration, and I'll just spend a minute kind of introducing what this community of practice is. It's just a place for people who are interested in restoration and commit to meeting with others who are interested to improve restoration. And one of the reasons that we got involved with this project is because one of our 3 goals is to elevate the state of restoration as a practice. And we feel strongly that, as Rowana said at the beginning of the call, regulations aren't always keeping pace with the fast-moving science and practice of restoration itself. And so this guidance really lays out some context for regulations that might help practitioners understand where those regulations come from. And it also helps managers by providing those 6 principles that Margot just laid out in working to improve regulations, as that wonderful example we just got from Hawaii. Finally, a big part of this project was really kind of understanding how regulations are working in various places. And we were hoping to get at least, 5 to 10 case studies, and you all you wonderful audience members and people from around the world actually contributed more than 50 case studies. So that really helped us as a team understand what's going on around the world, and those are all going to be available in the guide. So I think that will also be helpful for practitioners to understand, how their regulations in their particular country or location might compare to others. So I just wanted to thank the audience and my fellow panelists on really kind of laying out the landscape. And this is really just the beginning. As the CRC develops, we are interested in forming a policy working group to help people navigate this space. So if you're interested in that, please do reach out to the CRC. And I'd like to introduce another video from one of the organizations, Biofábrica de Corais, from Brazil. So with that, I will let you guys play the video, and happy to answer questions at the end.
Hello everyone, I am Clara Andrade, a communication and marketing analyst at Biofábrica de Corais, which is a marine biotechnology startup based in Pernambuco, northeast of Brazil. Firstly, I have to say that it is an absolute pleasure to be contributing with this webinar, and today I'll be sharing with you a little bit about how reef restoration works in our country, how it is regulated, as well as how environmental protection can coexist with innovation. Biofábrica de Corais works developing technologies for coral restoration while combining marine biology, material science, and regenerative tourism. Our coastline faces major environmental challenges, including the mass bleachings of 2020 and 2024. And to combat that, we work across 3 territories, Poço de Galinhas, Tamandaré, and Maragogi. In these territories, we work restoring reefs while engaging with local communities, local authorities, and tourism actors. In Brazil, coral restoration activities operate under broader environmental laws and inside multiple layers of protected areas, such as APAs and federal marine parks. With all of that in mind, it is important to consider that any intervention in sensitive ecosystems requires authorization from environmental agencies. Traditional permits focus strongly on impact control, but innovation-based restoration tends to involve regulatory interpretation and negotiation. Because there is no dedicated national regulation for reef restoration, our work depends on building trust with regulators by presenting risk assessments, monitoring plans, and ensuring transparency. One example is our cradle nubbing system. Fragments are fixed into small cultivation cradles, forming nubbings, which are later attached to modular nursery structures. This system was patented in Brazil and allows fast propagation, standardization, and monitoring. However, because it's a new intervention, it requires dialogue with regulator agencies to ensure safety, material neutrality, biosecurity, and ecological suitability. Our experience shows that regulation needs to maintain rigor, but also flexibility to integrate solutions that support reef restoration under climate change. Along the years, we learned that 3 things are essential: co-designing with regulators, which means letting them in early, allowing field visits, and sharing data; continuous monitoring, from growth rates to survival rates, as well as bleaching responses; and integration with the local communities, ensuring benefits to tourism professionals, fishers, and the local youth. These practices reinforce legitimacy and long-term policy adoption. As climate changes evolve, restoration will need not only science and innovation, but also regulatory frameworks that evolve accordingly. Our experience in northeastern Brazil shows that intervention and environmental protection can evolve together when dialogue is constant. Finally, I'd like to thank you all for allowing us to contribute to this global conversation. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. What a great video. So great to get that direct practitioner perspective. Of course, we would have loved to have more people from our colleagues that contributed to the case studies on the call live, but of course there's always that time zone issue, so that's why they are pre-recorded. But yeah, it was great to get their perspective as well. So so moving on to the kind of the last part of our sort of process would be the adapt. So that's using insights that have perhaps been gained from the collation and the review of the regulation, using those 6 principles to then understand what is the state of our regulatory landscape and what can we do to adapt that to better support and make coral restoration more effective. So some of the considerations that might be had would be, so which aspects of coral restoration are already well supported by legislation and regulation? Are there gaps, are there barriers, or are there inconsistencies? You know, we mentioned in the beginning that coherence both with policy and with regulation is really important to ensure that conflicting legislation doesn't prevent coral restoration from moving forward. Are there any are there multiple agencies involved there? I think that was a really great case from Brazil there, saying that, you know, getting those regulatory agents involved at the beginning and early on and having them do the process was very important to get their support and get their agency in moving the restoration forward. And then again, yes, making sure there's coordination, or is there coordination between different sectors, depending obviously on the area that's being restored or what techniques are being used might involve different sectors such as fisheries, environment, tourism. And what sort of short, medium and long-term actions could improve the coherence of the regulatory framework that already exists, and not only make it clearer to those that need to use that framework, but also make it more effective for those that are trying to enact those coral reef interventions. So that's kind of where our sort of document comes to a close, in a sense. And we wanted to share a little bit, about what next. So what, you know, we've spent this year working together and reaching out to lots of people from countries all over the world. It's just been so insightful. And I think it's been said already, but it's also been fascinating to understand the regional and national differences between countries' regulatory frameworks. It's very nuanced, and that obviously, of course, can make it very difficult to navigate those challenges. So that's been really interesting and something that we want to work more on. So certainly over, you know, the next year, the short term, we are very close to the festive season. We're aware that lots of people have clocked off already. So we are wanting to actually disseminate this work much further next year at international conferences, also, you know, through social media. So we make sure that this guidance can reach far and wide. And also to make the point, this is just a starting point. So our sort of conceived idea is that this is a starting point to provide some guidance and provide some support on reviewing those regulations. So we don't expect that this will be the end point for this, or that this is the end point for governments or agencies that are supporting these regulatory frameworks. We just see this as a starting point to start that discussion, start that review, and move forward with that. We want to support both practitioners and policymakers in this regulatory review. It's really important to us that all sides of the conversation are heard and considered. So we know that different challenges are faced by different groups of people within this coral reef restoration regulatory frameworks. So really valuable to hear any of our participants' viewpoints today. I know there's been some discussion in the chat. Please do ask any questions. So we're really keen to link up with countries all over the world to try and support in this review of these regulatory frameworks. So, you know, we are aware that there are some barriers and challenges in implementing effective regulatory frameworks for coral reef restoration. Some of those have been mentioned. So, you know, the lag behind novel technologies, all of that. That is just one of the challenges, but there are many others. So understanding those better can help us maybe provide more support on those targeted issues, and also have a better understanding of how we can facilitate more effective regulation for coral reef restoration. And as Tali mentioned there, we're also hoping to get together a policy working group under CRC that can help us really focus and tackle some of these challenges and barriers that people are experiencing, but also for policymakers also be able to provide that support and that guidance on reviewing their regulatory frameworks and on that journey as well. So I think that's a little insight. So I'm really delighted that we got to share this with you today. Our report will be launched shortly, so we will be forwarding that to everyone who has participated and registered for this webinar. We'll also be sharing with you the YouTube recording as well, so you can watch that back and or share with your networks as you see appropriate. So we're really hoping that through yourselves, participants in this webinar, we can also share this report as widely as possible. And as I said, we will be trying to disseminate and share more on this report next year at certain events as well. So I wanted to take this opportunity to also thank all of our panelists for joining today and all of the participants. It's been really great to have you. And I hope it's not a terrible time zone for everyone that's joining the call. We did want to open the floor as well to any questions that there may be from any of the participants. I don't know if anyone can see if there's anything in the Q&A. I can't see that right now. But if there's any questions there or any questions in, yep, there is some in the Q&A. There we go. I can see them there. Lovely. So let's just see. Yeah, we'll see if we've got any questions. And please do also put some in the main chat. If you do have a question, now is the time to put it in there. First question here is, hello, thank you for the presentation. Earlier you mentioned stakeholder engagement. Could I ask, how does the guidance you've made recognise the importance of traditional knowledge and permits? Thank you. So I think probably maybe direct that at Margot Hein, because I think we really cover that in the 6 guiding principles, but I'll
yeah, of course. I
there.
mean, yeah, thanks, Rowana. That's a great question. I think, incorporating traditional ecological knowledge in all aspects of the restoration project is of, the utmost importance. We're working with local communities and we're working for local communities. That's something that we should never lose sight of. And those, local communities have sometimes centuries of experience with interacting with the reef. So it's invaluable information and experience that needs to be integrated, if possible, at all stages of the processes. So that goes to the knowledge side of your question, I guess. And we also want to respect traditional use of resources and ensure that the conservation and restoration efforts that are going to be implemented are not going to be a conflict over those resources, but instead find ways in which we can reconcile the two and have effective conservation measures in place. As far as permitting goes, I think it's even more important to consider traditional ecological knowledge and systems that are already in place. As we said, we're not looking to reinvent what's already there. The first step of the whole document we're presenting is to review what's already there and find ways to strengthen it. So work with those local communities to strengthen their original system, respect what they have in place, and find ways to make sure we can adapt what already exists, if necessary, for the climate change era and incorporating innovative restoration at scale.
Thank you very much, Margot. I hope that answers your question. So then I also got some questions in here. So how can the small-scale fishers' artisanal fishing play a crucial role on coral reef restoration? Tali, I might pass that one to you.
Sorry, I was reading another question at the same time. Can you read it one more time?
Yeah, of course. How can the small-scale fishers' artisanal fisheries play a crucial role in coral reef restoration?
Oh yeah, such a good question. Actually, in many places, especially in places where the reef fisheries have declined for a number of reasons, artisanal fishers have been kind of re-employed to do reef restoration as sort of part of a positive feedback loop. First of all, they can earn money to do that, and also then the reef gets restored, and then, ostensibly the fish return. And that example I know has taken place in many places like the Dominican Republic, Belize. I believe that model has also been employed in Western Indian Ocean in a few places. So I don't know where this question is coming from, but I do know that is a model that could maybe be replicated in several other areas. And I apologize, I accidentally answered one of the questions in the Q&A, and I didn't realize that would make it go away. But there was a question from a teenager about how to get involved in reef restoration. And what I did was I put a link to a map that is hosted on the CRC website. Our website is crc.world. I also wasn't able to add to the regular webinar chat, but there is a place to register as a volunteer there now. That's kind of a new feature, and there are several places around the world where you can, if you're a diver especially, but even a snorkeler, you can volunteer in reef restoration.
Great, thank you, Charlie. Yeah, someone else saying, as I'm a fresh marine science graduate, how can I join or work with coral reef restoration? So again, directing you there. There's definitely lots of projects around the world that you could contact and get involved with. So lots of questions coming through now. So we'll try and get through as many as we can before the webinar ends. And I think slightly leading on from the question about fisheries is also about tourism. So it says, are there any examples of tourism-related coral restoration business models that generate income for local communities while supporting conservation actions? And how do regulations apply to these types of interventions? So anyone want to take that question? If not, I can. I will take it. So yeah, there are lots of examples where tourism related, tourism organizations, so hotels, dive centers, and maybe the person who was asking the question is from one of those who are doing coral restoration projects, often on a small scale. And they often do employ local community members to maintain their coral reef restoration areas, or do simple monitoring on them as well to check growth rates, survival, etc. How do regulations apply to these types of interventions? That is really varied. So I think one of the challenges that we found is that often regulations, they vary very wildly around the world, but also a lot of these smaller restoration projects are not always getting permits, aren't always going through the same channels. So there's a need to become more consistent in that regulation and permitting to cover newer projects of this. And I think that's that thing about adaptive and flexible regulatory frameworks, that there is an increasing number of people taking on coral restoration, which is excellent. It's fantastic. There are so many taking those steps, but we do need to make sure that it is evidence-based, that it is being done in the right place, that certain safeguards are taken as well. And often that's not happening where the regulation is not comprehensive enough or thorough enough. So that's definitely something that would be really interesting to look at more. How can we support on those specific projects, and certainly encourage more tourism organizations to do the same thing, but make sure that we're doing it in a robust and scientific based way as well. So I try and we've got a few more minutes. So someone has asked here, can coral reef restoration regulations take inspiration from forest restoration regulations, which seem to be more developed? So again, Charlie?
I can try that. So yeah, sure. One of a lot of the really early and kind of basic methods of coral restoration were really directly taken from forestry, kind of just like you might see a plant nursery taking cuttings from one plant, replicating, growing them small in a nursery, and then bringing them out to, say, a forest to do restoration. So those are some of the examples, and that works very well for branching corals. The fear these days, and the reason I said that the science and practice is moving quite quickly, is that, as we all know, the ocean is warming more rapidly than corals can adapt or evolve naturally. And so there's a lot of effort being made to increase the genetic diversity of corals and also actually manipulate their tolerance to warmer waters. So that's some of the science that people are pushing for good reason. And just by breaking off and fragmenting corals, you're kind of just you're creating more of the same, which has a lot of value because reefs just living and having coral tissue is really important. But yes, that there are many parallels. We probably have a lot more to learn from forestry and silviculture because they're dealing with a lot of these same issues as well, warmer air and movement polewards and things like that. So yeah, good question.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, Tony, as well, there is certainly, and we have discussed this sort of as a group along the way here, is that we also have a lot to learn from other ecosystems, so forests, but also mangroves and seagrass. There is lots of restoration happening there. Of course, with coral reefs, they're also linked ecosystems, and mangrove restoration, again, has been going for a long time. And there's a way that we can also join forces with those that are focused on, let's say, mangrove restoration or seagrass restoration, and try to have more impact, more effect by working together on some of these challenges, like Talia said, that are sort of universal. There are across ecosystems. They're not pertinent just to coral reef restoration. So that's also something that we want to build on, is kind of working across ecosystems to move forward some of these challenges. So I think, we've only got time for one more question. So I'm so sorry for those that we haven't got to. We will try and, I don't know, I'll have to ask Laura if we can answer them after the call has ended. But yeah, so just last one seems well, the one that just says, really appreciate the dissemination of the framework is addressed to heads of nations that's given the framework sharper teeth in enforcing existing regulations. There are coral restoration activities in the Philippines, but we observe they are failing mostly because they proceed without studies and proper permits. That's why I'm looking forward to the framework. So yeah, thank you very much for that comment. And that is definitely true. I mean, that's definitely what we've heard from other practitioners as well. So again, we are hoping that this will be able to provide that support for governments to make sure they have the proper permitting and framework in place. So, all right, and we've run out of time there. So we definitely will try and answer as many questions as possible. I think Laura was just going to show us the results from the poll that we did at the beginning of the webinar. And thank you all to all those as well that have said to get in touch that they're interested. We will certainly take your details and work with you as well. So the first question was, how easy or difficult is it to navigate the regulatory framework in the primary region you work? And we sort of asked it on a scale. So 0 being very easy, 5 being the hardest. And we can see that I think with the majority of answers are 2 to 4. So saying that presumably some of it is easy to navigate, but unfortunately there are still challenges in navigating that. And was there a second question as well, Laura? Yes, there we go. Would you be interested in working to improve your reef regulations? Pretty much an overwhelming yes. So that's great. That's great support. Thank you very much. I'm glad that everyone is also keen to develop this as much as we are. So yeah, thank you very much to everyone that's attended today. As I said, we will be following up with a recording of the presentation, and also the document itself we'll be disseminating in the new year. So you will get that sent to you. It could be on our UNEP-WCMC website, and please do share with those that you think are appropriate. I just wanted to, sorry, look, if someone could just show the last slide, Laura or Jen, just on that last slide there, we've just got Jen's contact details. So if anyone wants to get in contact with us to discuss anything more directly, please do email us. We'd be more than happy to chat with you. But I see some people have put their details there, so we'll take those down anyway. But thank you again to everyone for attending today. And hope for those of you having one that you have a good break over the festive season. And thank you again to the panelists.
Thank you all. Keep the questions coming. Hopefully we can record them all and answer them in due time.